Okay, I know some of you probably saw the title of this video and are now thinking, how could there possibly be 5 underrated Aquaman comics? Does he even have one highly rated or one overrated comic? You see, the thing is, when it comes to Aquaman, most if not all people immediately jump to recommending the Geoff Johns run on the character during the New 52, which, to be fair, is a very good pick. It's a great run and did a lot to elevate the character in the public eye. But that really seems to be everybody's go-to. That's the only one everybody recommends. But Aquaman as a character has been around for almost 75 years. He has had a lot more stories told about him than just one man's run in the early 2010s. So, in a way, every Aquaman story is underrated. I could just sit here and say, read everything not written by Geoff Johns and call it a day. But that's a coward's way out. And I'm Will Wulff, damn it. I go above and beyond for you guys out there. I mean, I'm actually filming this twice because the first time was blurry. All for you. So here is an actual list of my picks of the top 5 underrated Aquaman comics. Okay, so rules. Just like my other underrated lists, which you can conveniently watch right here, I'm only picking stories that were originally part of the then current ongoing Aquaman solo series, so no Justice League stuff in this list. Also, they have to have been considered to be in continuity at the time of original release, so no weird Elseworld stuff today. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. Get it? Dive, Aquaman, water, shut up. It's really late and I'm exhausted. Number 5.
You think you're unworthy to lead because you're of 2 different worlds. But that is exactly why you are worthy.
Part of me will never understand why Jeff Parker's run on Aquaman isn't as well remembered as it really should be. Not that people didn't like it, but I guess maybe because it came up immediately after Geoff Johns' legendary run on the character. And I get it, it's not easy to follow anybody, much less somebody who left such a huge mark on the character, but Parker did it with such skill that you wish his 16-issue run lasted much longer. His story begins in what would eventually be collected under the title Sea of Storms. Now, this is a very good trade, but it's not a traditional trade in that it doesn't tell one complete story. It actually tells 3 separate stories broken up in the appropriate chapters. And the stories kind of feel like little stories. They may not be fulfilling to some of you out there, but that's okay because really, Sea of Storms acts as the appetizer to Parker's main course, Maelstrom. Oh, that actually looks nice right there. Look at that. In Maelstrom, Aquaman is tasked with solving the mystery of why Atlantis all of a sudden is suffering major devastating earthquakes whenever he re-enters the city. This leads him on a quest to not only learn more about the history of Atlantis, but also learn what exactly happened on the night his mother, Queen Atlanta, died. The mystery surrounding Atlantis and Aquaman's past is pretty great. It's interesting and cryptic without being infuriating. We get to see Aquaman encounter some pretty interesting characters along the way, including Gorilla Grodd. Tying everything into the night that Queen Atlanta died could have easily come across as a cheap retcon that ultimately never amounts to anything. But Parker keeps you interested throughout the course of Maelstrom, and when we finally get to the big reveal at the end, it all feels worthwhile. The artwork by Paul Pelletier and Sean Parsons is just excellent, very well detailed, expressive, and actually does a lot to help the overall flow of the story. Maelstrom really does feel like the culmination of everything Jeff Parker was doing during his short run on Aquaman. In particular, Parker really liked to pit the King of the Sea against big-ass monsters. The trade to Maelstrom actually features a 3-part story where Aquaman fights a new monster from the deep, Chimera, and Sea of Storms is filled with Aquaman fighting various different underwater monsters, some of them even connected to Greek mythology. And sure, Aquaman may have fought weird monsters in the past, but they've never felt as interesting or as epic as they did during this run. I know the word epic is sometimes overused with regards to superhero comics, especially in this day and age, but Seeing Aquaman fight these beasts, especially the way Paul Pelletier draws them, really does need the word epic to describe them. And the way Jeff Parker weaves these monsters into not just Aquaman's world, but the greater DC universe as a whole is really clever. Jeff Parker's entire run on Aquaman is only spread across these two trades, and they're both worth your time, but if you only have time for one, definitely get Maelstrom. It is hands down one of the best Aquaman stories of the era, and really one of the best New 52 stories all around. Number 4. Peter David is a name that I think every comic book reader worth their weight should know. This is a guy who has had legendary runs on titles like the Fantastic Four. He had what many consider to be the definitive run on the Incredible Hulk for Marvel. And he was the main writer on Young Justice, a series that is very near and dear to my heart. So it turns out I'm a fake fan. Peter David didn't actually have a run on Fantastic Four. That was just a prose book that he did. I think I was thinking of Walt Simonson, but that doesn't mean I don't know my Peter David. I know he had good work on X-Factor, on Spider-Man. He had an excellent Supergirl run, which you should all check out. He even did some obscure Ninja Turtles comics based on the 2003 cartoon, which I think IDW reprinted, but anyway, I'm getting off topic. I just wanted to correct that because I know somebody in the comments is going to say something, and I just want to catch you off guard now, making this video longer as it is. All right, back to the video. He's also the man who gave us Hook Hand Aquaman. Sorry, Harpoon Hand Aquaman. He actually gets very mad if you get that wrong. Now, to be fair, Peter David's work on 90s Aquaman isn't actually all that bad. There are a lot of interesting moments in this series, and the scene of Aquaman getting his hand eaten by piranhas leading to the Harpoon Hand, I know I give the Harpoon Hand a lot of crap, but that truly is one of the iconic moments in this era of Aquaman. But we're not exactly talking about that particular run today. After all, this is underrated Aquaman stories, and I feel like with all the hoopla surrounding the 90s series of Aquaman, we tend to forget about Peter David's other Aquaman work, including Time and Tide. Aquaman Time and Tide is actually a 4-part miniseries from 1993. Now, technically, this isn't part of a main ongoing Aquaman solo book, but that's because when this was released, there was no ongoing Aquaman solo book, so this technically counts as one. Time and Tide acts as something of a retrospective year one for Aquaman. The character is looking back on his early adventures, such as his first time on land, his first time meeting a fellow superhero, and the first time fighting Ocean Master. Peter David uses this retrospective look to great effect. We really get to see Aquaman's history through his own eyes, and learn with him certain revelations that shake him to his very core. So 2 quick notes about this series. First off, I don't actually think this was ever officially collected in its own trade. The 4 issues that comprise this miniseries aren't that hard to find on sites like eBay, and they're not that expensive, but if you want a trade of the story, there isn't one for just Time and Tide. However, in an effort to make everybody's lives easier, DC collected Time and Tide along with the first few issues of Peter David's run on Aquaman in Aquaman by Peter David Volume 1. It's all a nice one collection for a decent price at that. And secondly, the reason why I'm including Time and Tide and not any of the other Peter David Aquaman stories is because Time and Tide actually acts as a great primer for this era of Aquaman. The post-Crisis on Infinite Earths Aquaman actually has a fairly different origin story from the one that we're all used to. Instead of being the half-human, half-Atlantean ruler of the sea, he's actually a full-blooded Atlantean named Orin who is left to die on the rocks of Mercy Reef as an infant because he was born with blonde hair. It's harsh. Now you may think that might not seem like that big of a deal, but I mention it because they actually do bring it up a lot throughout this era of Aquaman, and some of the things from his past do tie in to his then current present. So I definitely think it's a good idea to have some background on this era of the character, especially because I'm going to be recommending more books from this era. But Time and Tide is actually a really great introduction. It gives us the origin and it gives us new interesting stories from that era that shows us the man Aquaman became in this time frame. Number 3.
Nobody does that to my sister. Do you hear me? Nobody!
King of the Seas, remember?
It really does seem like DC tries to revamp Aquaman more often than any other character in their roster. They'll reboot him well before they decide they want to reboot their entire universe. I mean, that was the point of Harpoon Hand Aquaman, but even that version of the character had a shelf life. By the early 2000s, it was time once again for a change. So DC decided to go all out, and the first step was to cancel his ongoing solo series in 2001. We wouldn't get a new self-titled Aquaman book for another 2 years. During that time, per the events of the JLA story, The Obsidian Age, Aquaman is forced to resink the recently risen city of Atlantis in order to save it from the clutches of the sorceress Gamame. This person. That didn't really sit well with his fellow Atlanteans, who decided to exile their once king and sentence him to die on some rocks outside of the ocean. That really seems to be their thing to do to punish Aquaman during this time. And it's here where the 2003 Aquaman series truly begins, and this is the start of the Waterbearer saga by Rick Veitch. After escaping his intended grave, Aquaman stumbles upon a weird, mystical freshwater lake and is revived by the mysterious Lady of the Lake. She isn't given a name, it's more so implied that this is the same Lady of the Lake of the King Arthur legends. Ask a teacher. After reviving Aquaman, the lady gives him new abilities and a new mission in life. Tasked with spreading peace and healing throughout the world, Aquaman must now not only adjust to his new life outside of the ocean, but his new life as the water bearer as well. I was legitimately shocked with how much I liked this story. It moves the character in a new, interesting, more mystical direction. It's one that never really been done before with the character, but it's done very well in this story. Veitch uses this new status quo to give Aquaman a great new supporting cast, including new friends like McAfee and Sweeney, as well as a great new villain, the Thirst. But not only that, Veitch reestablishes Aquaman's bond with Tempest, the original Aqualad. Much like the relationship between Nightwing and Batman, the former sidekick has grown up and now doesn't see eye to eye with his former mentor, but the love and respect for each other is still clearly there. Also, this is the series that introduced us to the weird water hand. Now, I'll admit this was very strange to see at first, but you do get used to it over time, and it does introduce these cool new abilities and features that set this series of Aquaman apart from all of the rest. It's a shame that future writers didn't take more advantage of this like Veitch did. But at least Aquaman has two hands again. There's only so much you can do with a hand and a harpoon. Now, I should note that this trade is only the first 6 issues of Rick Veitch's run, and it ends on a cliffhanger. The second half of the story is unfortunately not collected yet. Hopefully, with the success of the movie, DC will realize they should be putting out more Aquaman books and release the second half of Rick Veitch's run, because it's a story that I'm really into and I would really like to see how it ends. The Waterbearer really is that kind of a story. It keeps you on the edge of your seat and interested to see all the weird twists and turns that it takes. And it's a great setup for an even better story that came not that long after. Number 2.
I'll tell you what you need is a fatty boom batty blunt, and then I guarantee you see a sailboat, an ocean, and maybe even some of them big-titted mermaids doing some of that lesbian shit.
After Rick Veitch's run ended, writer Wulff Pfeiffer and artist Patrick Gleason took over the title and decided that it was time once again for another Aquaman revamp. They ditched the beard, they put him back in the classic orange and green costume while still keeping the water hand, and they threw him headfirst into one of the wildest Aquaman stories to that time, American Title. Long story short, a portion of San Diego breaks apart from the mainland and sinks into the Pacific Ocean, sending thousands of people to their untimely death. The horror and tragedy showcased in the first issue is unlike anything you'd see in superhero comics of the time. The world is grieving from a 9/11 scale disaster, and Pfeiffer and Gleason masterfully show us a country radically shaken by what has happened. That is, until it's been revealed that those who were thought to have been lost actually survived the event, but have been mutated to only be able to breathe underwater. They can never resurface and walk on land again. There's a lot of mystery surrounding what happened to San Diego. Pfeiffer writes the series in a way that we, the audience, learn all of the answers at the same time that Aquaman does. And each new revelation just makes the story that much more interesting. We even get a cool new character to the Aquaman mythology in Lorena. She was one of the survivors of the incident and eventually becomes Aquaman's confidant during this whole situation and eventually takes up the mantle of the new Aqua Girl. This story just kicks ass. It's fast-paced and action-packed, while at the same time very dramatic, and does a great job of detailing this brand new world, not just for Aquaman, but for the whole DC universe. It's kind of surprising this wasn't a big-ass event. Aquaman hasn't really had his own event on the same scale as something like Batman No Man's Land or the Sinestro Corps War. It was released as just another Aquaman story, but while it would have been cool for it to be a big-ass event, Pfeiffer and Gleason create this truly exceptional story that only Aquaman could be the hero of. The American title story was recently collected in a trade called Sub Diego. After issue 22, Will Pfeiffer left the book, leaving writing duties to John Acrudi. He wound up finishing the whole Sub Diego story. He did an admirable job of continuing to build the world of Sub Diego and add his own little touches here and there to make it his own unique thing, but you never forget your first impression, and American Title leaves a damn good first impression. It was actually almost my number one pick, but there's actually a story I feel deserves that place much more. So, number one.
What could be greater than a king?
A hero.
So when I do these underrated lists, in addition to the 2 rules I have at the top of the episode, I also have 2 unspoken ones that aren't necessarily hard and fast rules, but they're just some that I follow. 1, I try not to recommend books that were released before Watchmen. It's often hard to read an older comic, especially if you're used to the more modern style of writing. More often than not, older comics are often way too wordy, way over detailed. They don't trust the reader to follow the artwork to see what the story is about. They have to over-explain everything that's going on. Also, I try to physically own the books I'm recommending. I know that's a stupid rule. I've recommended books that I own digitally in the past, but for a list like this, I feel like it's important to actually show that I found the title worthy enough to take up space in my house. And trust me, these take up a lot of space. I'm breaking both of those rules for my number 1 pick, Death of a Prince. This story was originally released in the 70s, and while it was collected into trade paperback actually not too long ago, it's since gone out of print and is just as hard to find as the original 70s single issues are. But I'm including it on this list because I think it's important to tell people that even at a time when Aquaman would have been considered to be at his corniest, he was still a part of some of the most dramatic and dark stories in all of comics. Death of a Prince kicks off with the death of Aquaman and Mera's infant son, Arthur Jr., at the hands of Black Manta, and the rest of the series is all about the fallout of that. Aquaman is trying to get back home to inform his wife of the horrible news, but keeps getting into distraction after distraction, each one taking more of a toll on him than the last. A man already at his lowest point, just continuing to get lower. This story came out in 1978, so a few years after the night Gwen Stacy died. So stories about big traumatic deaths in comics have happened already by this point, but they didn't happen very often, and they sure as hell didn't happen in a Aquaman title to his infant son. The idea alone that they would tell a story like this in a book like Aquaman is just as shocking now as it was back then. I assume I wasn't alive back then. And the way it's handled with such maturity really does set it apart from everything else that was happening at the time. Death of a Prince was created by a bunch of different writers and artists. It was primarily written by David Michelinie and Paul Kupperberg, and the art was handled by Jim Aparo, Don Newton, and Bob McLeod. I mostly know Jim Aparo from his work on Batman, but his work here is truly timeless in every sense of the word. This is the classic Aquaman look rendered with real human emotions, not just the cheesy smile you'll see on t-shirts in a mall kiosk. And Don Newton and Bob McLeod draw the issue where Aquaman finally confronts Mera. The horror, anger, and sorrow on display here is just as effective today as it was in the 70s. I know full well this story is not going to be for everybody. I know that some of you who do go out and try to read it will find it dated, boring, and maybe even a little bit campy. But sometimes I think it's worth it to check out the history of a character to see where they started and how they were molded and shaped into the character that we love to read and watch today. And especially for a character who spent years being considered to be a joke, the fact that he has such dark and traumatic stories in his library already just shows that it's possible to tell serious tales about Aquaman of all characters. I mean, again, his infant child is killed. How much more serious and traumatic can you get?
The answer is none.
Death of a Prince originally occurred in the pages of Aquaman issues 57 to 63. I should point out that the series technically started in Adventure Comics, specifically issues 451 and 452. 452 is the one where Arthur Jr. actually dies. But they only start in Adventure Comics because there was no Aquaman ongoing at the time. This series was so popular that they actually brought back the Aquaman solo series to finish telling this story in. And it was absolutely worth it. Even if you only read Aquaman's 57 to 63, you're going to get one of the greatest stories in Aquaman's history, and really one of the best stories of DC's entire Bronze Age. It's a true classic of the publisher. Definitely read Death of a Prince. And there you have it, my list of the top 5 underrated Aquaman comics. Amazon links to all of them will be in the description below, along with a couple of other ones that I think go along well with the ones I recommended, like Sea of Storms and the 2 John Acrudi Sub Diego titles. I also made sure to list what issues actually comprise Death of a Prince, so if you want to go check them out, you can do so. They're available on Comixology, and the Aquaman titles 57 to 63 are on the DC Universe app. That's how I was able to read the story for this review. Do you have any favorite Aquaman stories that I might have left out? Did I inspire you to go and actually read an Aquaman comic? Let me know down below or anywhere on the internet. Of course, don't forget to check out Wulff Den Apparel. Don't forget that we have new videos every Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday is the backlog, and Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern is Wulff Den Live. So subscribe to see all of that. Like this video and share it with a friend who maybe doesn't know that there are good Aquaman stories out there. Show them this video and maybe they'll turn into an Aquaman fan or an Aquaman stan. It could happen. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time.